All right, good afternoon, everyone. MicroCAD Tech Team coming at you today. Specifically, my name is Mariah. So if I have worked with you before, happy to see you guys back here. If not, it's nice to meet you. And we are going to talk about generative design today. So in our little PowerPoint, so what is generative design? Now, you've probably heard the term generative design throughout a lot of your architectural or engineering processes. However, the generative design that we are speaking of today is actually now built into Revit through Autodesk. So Autodesk has graciously provided us with 6 out-of-the-box design studies, as they call them, and you can see them listed here on your screen. Now, we can't always build upon those because they are based upon the Dynamo function that is hosted within Revit, but these certainly give you somewhere to start. Now, a little bit more information about generative design. So, all users that have an AEC subscription do have access to this. However, one thing that I do want to make you aware of is that every company's software coordinator does actually need to assign this separately within the Autodesk account. So you'll see a screenshot from my personal Autodesk account here on the screen. And as you see, Revit and generative design within Revit are actually 2 different entities. So just be aware of that when you're going and trying to assign this. So with that, I'm actually going to hop over into Revit itself and discuss this information a little bit further. So the generative design does live on the Manage tab that we see here within Revit. And then from there, bear with me, I seem to have lost the actual dialog box that comes with this. There is a generative design right here. Let me see, it's probably living on another screen. Please bear with me. Yep, okay, there it is. So it happens when you are running multiple screens at once. So within that generative design panel, once you do launch it, you have an additional dialog box, as you do see on the screen here. And these are the same study types that we just saw listed in that PowerPoint. Now, what do these kind of do for us? So there is that grid object placement. We can maximize some window views, randomize our object placement. We can step our grids. There's also some 3D box massing if you're still in the initial concept phase of your design. And then last but certainly not least is the workspace layout, which can generate some different layouts, obviously, for different types of rooms, maximizing views, avoiding columns, calculating distances, that sort of thing. So with that, let's look at some of the information that's within here. So I'm just going to pick on maximize view for a second. And all of these studies look very similar, although they do have their own little nuances. So just to be aware of that. So up here in the top, you can certainly name your study. If you don't, it's just going to appear with that kind of grayed out portion. So under that is our method. So we have like this, randomize, optimize, and cross product. Now, what do those mean? So optimize is meant to iterate and meet some goals that you are trying to set up. It's going to give you multiple generations from a design, really optimizing what you're trying to do. Under randomize, we are going to look at, some values within some specific ranges. So perhaps you're not trying to meet anything at this point. You're just trying to understand what might be some actual solutions for you. Next up is our cross product, which distributes values within the even more specific ranges. So you'll see here kind of some of these numbers changing as I click through here. And you're seeing that the total number of outcomes is actually adjusting as we're selecting our different methods. And then last but certainly not least is like this. So like this is something, if you already have something kind of set up, perhaps we're looking at a workspace layout with a certain number of people, and you feel like you're starting to get to that point that's going to be your final design, but you might want to tweak it just a little bit. That's what the like this method is for. So more often than not, we probably would see a lot of our clients using that optimize just because you're wanting to, optimize all of your settings and information along those lines. So after you have chosen which method you want to use, you can then dive down into the select. So from here, we see select element to create view from. So in this instance, I am going to save that project because that dialog box always comes up when you least expect it. We're going to place a desk here in this room just as an example. So select, and it does prompt you, which is very informative and helpful. You can come in here, select one item. You will see then that little warning orange triangle now goes to a green check. Just means you got that proper information in there. Next, we're going to select multiple windows or curtain elements. In this instance, we're going to select our windows. And then after you select them, just a little heads up, within your options bar that comes up in Revit, there's a finish and a cancel. So you're just going to do that quick finish. Same with our room here real quick. And then anything that is obstructing. And for the moment, I'm just going to say the doors might be obstructing. If you would have another desk or perhaps some structural columns within here, you could certainly select those as well. And just like our windows on our options bar, we do have to check that finish button. So within here, there's some variables that you can start to work with. So if you would see me unclick here, you can have a constant. You can check, you can have some variables, either or. You can then views to outside, maximize those, minimize those. What is that average angle? Certainly minimize and maximize those as well. And then you can even have some more constraints. So, the views, is there only a minimum of one view, a maximum of a certain number? And then an angle as well in this instance. So next up is understanding our population, generations, and our seed. So our population size, this is actually only going to populate when you have the method of optimize chosen. So just be aware of that. And it starts the initial population of how much, entities you kind of want to have. Next up is our generation. And again, this also only comes up when we are in that optimize method. And this, kind of goes through that overall selection. Really, you have a mutation that occurs, 40 sometimes, and then each of those populations is another 40 times on top of that. So it just, kind of goes down the rabbit hole, if you will, and looks at that information. And next up is the seed. So the seed actually will appear in optimize, randomize, and also like this. So just to be aware of that. And the seed just provides a starting point for that algorithm. So if you start at 1 every single time, a lot of instances you are going to get those same results. Whereas if you would start your seed at 2 or 3, you're certainly going to have, some different results possibly within there. So last but certainly not least is issues. So issues is just letting you know if anything is not properly populated or if you're missing information. So it says, no, we are ready to generate results. So I am going to go ahead and generate. And I did have a few of these kind of populated earlier from the day. And of course, it's not going to let me click on those. Bear with me one second. Explore outcomes. All right. So earlier in the day, I ran a few of these, and one of them that I did was this grid object placement. And you can see, the date from there early. I ran it a little earlier. And what I did in this instance was I actually selected, let me scroll this down here a little bit. In this open office area, I selected what this is actually a piece of shelving, just to use it as a grid to see what kind of layout I would get. And it has generated these different outcomes. Now I'm just going to enlarge this again just to be aware. So again, depending upon the number of settings that you have is how many outcomes you are going to receive. And down here is kind of a little graphical way to start to look at some of your outcomes. So in this instance, perhaps you want less number of objects. You can certainly move this slider up and down and narrow that down to a specific range. You can see taking the range out, there we go. So I'm just going to expand that. But that's certainly a way when you have a lot more studies, you can certainly dive down into information. And then once you have actually decided which one is your preferred layout, you can actually select it. And down here in the lower right-hand side, we actually have create Revit elements. So I'm actually going to go ahead and create those. And it says element creation completed. And hopefully in the background you are seeing all this information is populating. So just be aware that's how that works. All right, so it does look like our most recent one that we just sent is complete, which it is pretty quick depending upon, how many seeds and how many generations and populations you want to look at. But as we see here, we do have, quite the view and different angles that we can work with. And they're all quite similar if you're kind of looking at the overall bounding box and where that desk is located. But just a little bit more can certainly make a difference. And this is something, if you have morning facing sun versus afternoon facing sun, it could really start to play into where you would want your layout to be for your clients or for your, your employees if that's who you're dealing with this for. All right, so Rebecca, are we seeing any questions come through at this time, or does anyone have any questions?
I don't see any yet, but feel free to throw them into that little question section. And there is also a handout as well about generative design, just so you guys don't miss that. But if you have any questions, you can throw them in that little section and we can help you out there.
All right, thank you. Yes, and as reference, I might have forgot to mention this. Generative design at the moment is only available on Revit 2021, so be aware of that. That could actually be, a great reason for your company to upgrade to the next version. And I'm sure, as 2022, I'm sure we'll be lurking along not too far in the distant future. We are going to see, I hope we're going to see generative design again in 2022, as well as possibly some more studies. So I know I'm keeping my eye out for that. I hope everyone else is doing the same. Okay. So I'm seeing a question, is this a plugin or is it a built-in? So it is, by Autodesk's definition, it's more of a plugin. You simply need to have your software coordinator apply this to your license information within their Autodesk account. So much like someone, goes in and assigns Revit or AutoCAD, they just need to go in and assign this. And this is something that everyone with the AEC collection has. So there shouldn't be any issue with assigning that. Right, any other questions from anyone? All right, well, I know that was, can this be used in Dynamo as a node? So these are actually built upon the overall Dynamo platform. As this being one node exclusively, I would say probably not, but granted, I will admit I haven't dive down into the brains of the operation, if you will. But because this is built on Dynamo, we can start to use this information to create other studies. But I would guess that this is not just a single node entity within Dynamo.